Okay, greetings everybody. Hope you're doing well. Let me just do a sound check and see that you guys can hear me okay. Just pop me a message quickly so that I know you all can hear me. Great, good evening, Shanique. Cool, nice to be with you guys this evening. My name is Greg Douglas. I am calling in today from PE, where I live, Port Elizabeth. I would also like to get to know you just a little bit. So maybe in the messages, you can just tell me where you're calling in from. I live in PE, I guess somebody has to. And I work at Varsity College as a contact lecturer. I've been working here for about 9 or 10 years, lecturing all kinds of different things. But in the last few years, I've focused a lot on English literature, which I have a master's degree in. And I've been teaching. This is actually the first time I've taught this module, so it's a bit new to me. The work is new and fresh and interesting, but also I have been lecturing lots of other English modules too across the different years, first year, second year, third year, for a while. I have lectured online before, but that was during COVID, so it's been a few years. I'm a bit rusty with VC Learn, so I kind of got to find my feet a bit again. Let me just show you that I am an actual human being and not a robot AI thing calling in from the ether. So this is what I look like as a person in my house here in Glenhaven, PE. So I'm going to go off video because I know that you guys probably want to use as little data as you can just to keep the downloads of the videos nice and small. And I think we can get into it. I'm just going to focus on giving you guys the slides. And you can all see the slides, right? It's nice and clear, all good. So this this module is called English 1B. Today I'm going to do an introduction to Learning Unit 1. I'm going to look a little bit at the text in Learning Unit 1. It's going to be the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, starring Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio. You don't have to have seen the movie right now, but definitely in the next few days, make a point to set some time aside and watch the film. It's pretty long. It's like 2.5 hours long or so. It's available on Netflix. So make sure if you have an account, you can watch it there pretty easily. If you don't have an account, it's kind of just got to make a plan somehow, borrow it from somebody else or something like that. But make sure you set aside the time to watch it. It is kind of long. What I've done is watched in like 3 sort of sessions, just that I can take it all in because there's a lot going on in the film. That's going to be Learning Unit 1. Let me quickly also introduce you to some of the other texts we are going to be doing over the course of this semester. LU1 is the movie. Learning Unit 2 is a collection of short stories written by Angela Carter, The Bloody Chamber. It's called The Bloody Chamber. Learning Unit 3 is going to focus on poetry, specifically resistance poetry. I think we have 4 prescribed poems in there. Howl by Allen Ginsberg. It's this funny looking guy over here in the picture. Then we've got a poem by Maya Angelou called Still I Rise, another poem called The Weaver Bird, and William Blake's London. So there's 3 poems. You can find those all online for free. You don't have to go buy anything. And then we'll finish up the semester and the year with LU4, a novel called The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, written by Mark Haddon. So we've got quite a diverse range of different things here. We've got a movie, short stories, poems, and a novel. They all do different things. They're all about different things, set in different times, different countries. But I think the overarching theme that links all of these things together in a coherent, meaningful way is that they're all about people or events or situations that go against conventional thinking, okay? A lot of the writers we're focusing on are also writers who wrote and created stuff that was kind of subversive went against the grain of the norm, was a bit unusual, surprising, even shocking. And they kind of take a bit of a joy at being disturbing or shocking creators. In your first semester, you guys did a lot of canonical texts, right? So canonical means classic stuff that's survived a long time and is regarded as being the great works of literature, stuff that you kind of need to know in order to understand what literature is all about, and which you need to read in order to be a fully rounded, fully educated human being, right? So the canonical stuff was like, where did we even start? But I know we did fairy tales. We did, man, I'm drawing a bit of a blank all of a sudden what we did. Fairy tales, we did Sherlock Holmes, we did The Adventures of Alice in Wonderland. I just can't remember what we started with, but they're all stuff that's kind of regarded as being classic. You know, things that have, like I said, Alice in Wonderland was kind of the classics of the genre, classics of the style, things that almost set our modern day expectations for what literature is, what it's supposed to be. When you think about what a fairy tale is, the way I teach fairy tales is that it's like a vessel that contains a narrative, but not just a narrative, also wisdom and folklore and stuff future generations need to know in order to become part of their society, become part of their group, become part of a culture, in order to survive the world, right? It's got that wisdom in it. So the stories are metaphors or allegories and so on. But the reason we continue to tell fairy tales to each other, and especially to children, is because the metaphors, the allegories, the stories contain morals or lessons, the things that we regard as being important to remember and know so you can live and thrive. What these writers do, in contrast, is that they kind of go against that conventional wisdom that's been given to us. They are kind of in a way, a backlash against the canon, right? They look at the classics, the traditional thing, and they say, I want to go a different way. The world is changing. The world is different. I want to do it some other way. I want to break the rules, go against the norm, and do unusual things, okay? And this kind of fits with the way I like to teach literature too. I'm aware that you guys have to just know certain things. There is a bit of a script. So I'm going to be very careful to make sure that I go through as much as I can, even though we have limited time. I want you to know the things you're supposed to know. But I think literature is also something to be enjoyed, to be savored. All of these writers, Ginsberg, Shakespeare from first semester, Quentin Tarantino, who's a movie director and a writer, Carter, Haddon, they write these stories, make these movies for us to enjoy, to make us laugh, to shock us, to disturb us, to give us a good time. And you've got to look at these texts through that lens. These aren't things where you've got to slog through and treat purely as homework. But you've also got to see what their intentions were. How are they trying to shock me? How are they trying to get me to laugh or rethink the norm? And as students of this stuff, the other question you're asking yourself is, how did they achieve that effect? What did they do? What did they use? What words or camera angles or music or perspectives did they bring in that achieved that effect of comedy, of being disturbed, of horror, of confusion, or whatever it is that they want to try communicate to you through the screen, through the page? So keep that in mind. Enjoy it, but keep your analytical brain turned on to how that enjoyment is produced. Okay, then a little bit more housekeeping from my side, then we'll get going. I think that your assessments will remain the same structure this semester. This is how we did first semester for assessments, and I think it's staying the same for me in contact classes, but I think this is how you did it in your first semester as well. I don't think you've had a sit-down exam or anything. You did an assignment 1, which is also called part 1, Then you did a POE as your exam. It's going to be structured the same way, where the lower marked question you had in part 1 is carried over to the POE, where you resubmit it, changed based on the feedback I give you, and with a reflective aspect to it as well. I think that's how you did your first semester too. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how it's going to look this semester again. So that's correct. Okay, cool. So it's staying the same. Plus, of course, there will be ICE tasks. So this part 1 constitutes 25% of your final mark. POE is 65%, and ICE makes up the difference of 10. So I will give you 4 ICE tasks over the course of the semester. It might be 5, maybe 6, it depends, but I've got to give you at least 4. So I'm going to give those out at a learning unit, and that will probably be about 1 per month. And it's simple. You do the ICE task and you do it in good faith, you complete it on time, you get 100% for the ICE task. And it's just such an easy way for you to score 10% of your final mark pretty quickly. It's about getting runs on the board, and it's a pretty easy way to do it. Okay, I think we're going to start actually looking. I'm going to give you basically now an overview of Learning Unit 1. Historical context, because the movie is set in a specific time. Quentin Tarantino, the director, he's got in the picture there, is a pretty famous film director. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before. I was teaching the same stuff to my contact class the other day. They're all like sort of 19, 20 years old. And I said, how many of you know who Quentin Tarantino is? Have you ever watched any of his movies? And I have a class of about 50 or 60 that drew a complete blank. So nobody had watched him or maybe even heard of him. I'm not sure how familiar you are with his work. He has made, there's a wow. So I'm assuming, Jody, you mean that you have heard of him and you regard him as being kind of famous. He is probably one of the most famous film directors in the world. He doesn't make movies of the kind that make $1 billion these days, like superhero movies, but he's made some highly regarded, well-watched, critically acclaimed films over the many years he's been active. And he's been active since about 1992. And these are, I think I've got all of his films here, maybe 1 or 2 missing. But he's been active since about 1992, and his most recent film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the one we'll be studying this semester, was released in 2019, so about 5 years ago. And the reason he's kind of known to me anyway is because I was, so you saying he's done some of the best introspective movies. I was just shocked that no one heard. Yeah, I think the way people get movies these days is quite unusual. You don't really rent them, don't really watch them in a cinema. It's kind of hard to run into the great directors unless you make a conscious effort to. And you know, the reason I know him quite well, and the reason I've watched, I think, all of these actually, with the exception of maybe Death Proof, is that I was 92, I was 7 years old when he released his first film, Reservoir Dogs. So his movies came out as I was growing up, and was beginning to. There's another, never heard of him. I think it's, like I said, it's understandable because it's kind of hard to run into these films these days. But he was releasing films as I was growing up. And so the thing about him is that we all knew Quentin Tarantino as being a guy who made very violent movies with a lot of swearing and a lot of sex. So we got, you know, sex, drugs, rock and roll, killing, violence, humor. His movies are actually very funny, and they have great music. And like for a teenage boy just coming of age, that's like the perfect cocktail of ingredients. You know, that's exactly what you want to watch, because you know you're not allowed to. You know, your parents would throw a fit if they ever discovered you watching Tarantino movies, because they were all R18, so you couldn't like get into them at the cinema. Instead, you had to have a friend whose dad copied it on VHS, and then the video goes around the class, and everybody takes turn to watch the latest Quentin Tarantino movie on the sly. So it was like kind of a a subversive thing in its own right just to watch a Tarantino film. I think my favorite one of his is, I think the Kill Bill movies are great. They're like these kind of kung fu movies, but very serious. And they're made in an extremely exaggeratedly violent, funny, surprising, over the top kind of a way. And the thing about Tarantino is that he, as I say in my slides here, he's the other thing everybody knows about him who knows anything about him is that he has an encyclopedic knowledge of films. He used to work, when he was a young man, he used to work in a movie shop, I think in Miami, Florida, and he was very well known as being a guy who'd watched everything. He has this obsessive, compulsive need to watch all films. I'm not joking. He watches everything. When I was researching this and watching some interviews with him online, he says he's probably watched more films than he hasn't watched. So he's a guy who just has an encyclopedic knowledge of film history, of directors. And it's like I say here, it's almost as though he doesn't live in the real world as a person. His movies don't really try to depict reality. They don't try to be truthful necessarily and realistic. They actually are more, they draw less from the real world than they do from film reality, right? From the made up fictional world, as I say there. His films are steeped in other films. He's interested in things like genre and the conventions of genre and the kinds of stereotypes and tropes and characteristics of films. Not so much being a guy who's interested in capturing psychological realism or physical realism. He's not that kind of director. He's not really that interested in, quote unquote, the real world. He's more interested in how film creates a secondary world for us to live in. And so as a film director, he's kind of interested in how our technologies mediate the world, frame the world for us, and turn it into a story through the medium of film, cinema, TV, storytelling, and so on, and how that world of storytelling, of narrative, of film, is almost more important and more real for us as modern day humans than the physical material world is. How that's where we get our meaning, our sustenance, our culture from, above the material world. It's a place we escape to, where we are entertained, where we dream, where we get our heroes, our villains from. And I think he makes a good point because if you think about just watching the news these days, the news is like a movie, and the way the news is told to us unfolds like a movie as well. So it's like sometimes you're watching something and you think, is this real? Is this actually going on? It seems to be real, but the way it gets framed for me by these people in the news makes it feel like I'm watching a story that's been engineered into making me feel a certain way about the event, which I might feel differently about if I saw it another way. Like I was watching, I like to watch politics and I follow US politics and Trump and all this stuff. And, somebody tries to shoot Donald Trump one day, and I almost get to watch it on live TV or on live social media anyway, because I followed it along on Twitter, X, and it's like watching a movie. It really happened, but at the same time, it's also being turned immediately into a story and an interpretation of the story, and then a whole bunch of other narratives, including conspiracy theories and using it for political purposes and so on. So Tarantino comes out of a world like that, where story, narrative, media, mediation are the things that create our reality for us, and his movies reflect that. So what you will see in this movie is that it's a movie about movies, because that's his lifelong obsession. That's also the world we live in, where we live in a world dominated by media, and movies are part of media, and how that creates for us a secondary reality that we tend to live more in than the actual world, right? Tarantino is also called, a word you can use for him is auteur. Okay, it's just a fancy French word. You can see over there, auteur comes from the French word for author. Okay, I get this idea from one of the required readings for the module. It's on VC Learn. You can get it. It's by a writer called Saris from 2004, and Saris offers us a definition of what auteur means. And we can understand Tarantino to be one of these, an auteur. In the context of film, an auteur is a filmmaker, usually the director, whose personal influence and artistic control over a movie are so significant that they are regarded as the film's author, like their whole author. Okay, so they are the ultimate controller of the film. There's a little bit more detail on that term. So this is very unusual for a film director to be called an auteur, an author of the film, because making a film is a deeply and extremely collaborative process. Okay, a film begins usually with a screenwriter who writes up a script, all the lines, the story, the plot, the characters, in like a 90-page script or something, which they create themselves originally, or which they get from an idea from, an adapting a book into a movie. So there might be a previous author before that. The screenwriter is responsible for step one. Then you have the people who are going to put the money in, the producers, right? Making a film is very, very expensive. There's a lot of money that has to get pumped into a production, and the money is going to come from somewhere. And also, people spending the money want to make it back and then some. They're not just spending money out of the goodness of their own heart to make cool films. They want to make a profit. So those producers immediately exert a kind of financial control over the outcome of the movie, because they're the ones who make the movie happen. Okay, they invest in it, they bring it to life. So you've got the screenwriter, you've got the money, you've got the actors who are, known for having a bit of an ego and want to be famous and want to be in great films. They also are talented, and they have an interpretation of the script they read. They want to perform it in a certain way, which might be in conflict with how the producers want it done, which might be in conflict with how the screenwriter intended it. On top of all that, you've got the director, and the director is kind of the general, the marshal of the movie, the person, man or woman, who is meant to make the whole thing happen, bring it to life, tell the actors how to act, set everything up, decide how things should be shot, in what order, and it's a very technical job as well. It requires a lot of technical and artistic skill mixed together, but very often the director is beholden to the will of the producers, the egos of the actors, and the intentions of the scriptwriter. And so nobody in that little calculation has all that much ultimate control. Sometimes there is a director who is so talented, who's so unique, who has such a profound sense of vision and ambition, but also ego and personality, that they basically control this whole process. Okay, they write the script, they direct the film, they cast the exact actors they want to. The actors are so in awe of the director that they will do whatever he or she tells them to do. And the producers are happy to spend money on that director because he or she is so talented that they just know they're going to make an original, wonderful, profit-making film. Not many directors have talent like that. Some have over time, like Alfred Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick, and also Quentin Tarantino. Another one might be, say, Wes Anderson. These they're so talented they can kind of do everything, and they're so charismatic that they're able to get all the people around them in the movie making process to deliver on their individual vision their style that they have, their approach, the things they want to do, the thematic preoccupations, and for the director, the auteur, to be the primary driving force behind the entire film, for this to be something that is cooked up in their head alone, delivered in a collaborative process, but in exactly the way they envision. Okay, that's a very unique and weird thing. Doesn't happen a lot, and so not many people are called an auteur. So the fact that Tarantino is kind of places him in a very rare category of directors who's regarded as being special. Special because their work is very original and interesting and always surprises you with what they decide to do and how they deliver it. They also usually have a kind of a signature style. They are known for certain things. Like Tarantino, the kind of shots he uses, the dialogue that he writes is very original to him. Only he can really do it in a way that works. His musical choices, what he makes films about, and the fact that he, as I said, has an interest in using other movies, the conventions of other movies, and subverting them to tell the story he wants to tell. And so this film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, is a movie about Hollywood. It's a movie about other movies. All of his movies actually are movies about other movies, but this one, he's kind of taken it a step further and has actually set the movie, the mise en scène. It's set in the very place, the very physical place where movies for a long time have come from. Okay, so we're talking about Hollywood here. Hollywood is I guess I would call it like a suburb or an area, neighborhood of Los Angeles in California, America, where for about the last 100 years or so, movies have been made. Not necessarily set there, not about Hollywood, but made in Hollywood and then distributed to the rest of America and indeed the rest of the world as well. So Hollywood is I describe it in, I think a good way to describe it is to kind of say it is the dream factory of the world. It's the place where our stories for a long time now have come from. It used to be that we human beings would huddle around a campfire and exchange folklore or fairy tales, right? Thousands of years ago. Now the modern human being creates films, and those films for a long time now have been dominated by their emergence from Hollywood. It used to be called Hollywood Land, but then the LAND fell off and they just didn't replace it because Hollywood sounded a bit better. So it looks something like this. Now, I think we all have our own received expectations of what Hollywood means. You know, it's the place where you go to star in movies, get famous, get rich. Not so much anymore. Its power has begun to decline, right? With the rise of streaming services, social media, the internet, your ability to make your own media about yourself, AI, all the rest of it, has contributed recently to the decline of the power, the cultural power of Hollywood. But since about the 1920s or so for about 100 years, a century, since film has existed, and it's existed as a medium of storytelling for about 100 years, the Hollywood system has been the progenitor, the creator of movies and media and stories for a mass audience, for a large audience, a national one, an American audience, but also a global audience, because Hollywood movies are for an international audience as well, still are. For a very long time, let me go to this next slide here. If you just think of the title again, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's being described as a fairy tale place, right? The story we're going to watch is not like a fairy tale, although maybe it is, because fairy tales are also pretty gruesome and violent. But Once Upon a Time, it's a fairy tale place because this story is like fairy tales, right? The story is going to be set in Los Angeles in the 1960s. That's what its mise en scène is. There's a lot of romanticism, a lot of kind of beautiful stuff going on, beautiful landscapes, sets, people, images, but it also has a lot of extreme violence and darkness in it. The movie is set in the film industry itself, so it's a movie that has other kind of mini movies in it, but is also set in the very physical place where movies themselves are made. Set in the 60s, right, specifically in about 6 or 7 months in the year 1969, a little bit more on that soon. And that was a time when Hollywood had kind of it had just gone past its peak point of cultural power. Okay. For a very long time, what had dominated Hollywood was the system called the studio system. Basically, you had a lot of different studios who made the films in Hollywood on these massive sets, these big location sets. And each studio had its own lot, its own LOT lot, its own set, these big hangars where they would shoot their movies. And if you wanted to shoot a movie set in 1947 Paris or 1951 Moscow, they didn't go to Paris or Moscow to film. They just built Moscow and Paris on the studio set. They built it in those large hangars. So it gave the studio system a lot of control over the movies. So directors, writers, actors were basically just employees of the studio system, and they were making just a ton of movies and TV shows every week, month, and year. They would just pump this stuff out. It was like I say, a factory, but a dream factory, a story factory. These movies would get made, produced, and then shown in cinemas all over America and eventually the world too. And I think the other thing you can maybe take from this is that just like with, as I was talking about fairy tales have a moral or a lesson in them. You could probably say that movies have something similar going on. I would say that movies are, in a way, especially American movies, are somewhat ideological, right? They confer to us or they communicate to us certain values, norms, conventions that are desirable or normative. I'm not going to say that American movies are deeply patriotic or anything like that, but the Hollywood system, whether consciously or by accident, projected a vision of America out into the rest of the world that portrayed it in a kind of desirable way. This is the best country in the world. This is where important things happen. This is where the stories come from. This is where it's all happening. And movies have that secondary story to them. Yes, they're enjoyable, they're entertaining, they're made for a large consumerist audience, but they also have a secondary layer of meaning to them as well. And the 60s also saw this rise, really the 40s, the 50s, the 60s as well, saw this rise in popular entertainment, that emanated directly from Hollywood and had in it, like I said, this, in a sense, a portrayal of life, of the world, that in a way, kind of, perhaps you can say, brainwashed people into a certain perspective of what's good, what's normal, who good people are and who bad people are, what a meaningful life is versus what a meaningless life is. And it was telling the story not just of, say, a character and a plot, but also telling the story of a whole set of values and a whole civilization too, like fairy tales writ large, in a sense. The interesting thing about the 60s and the interesting thing about the movie is that the 60s, I don't know, again, what you know about it. Feels like a long time ago now. This is like 60 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. The 60s were a very, very interesting, strange, tumultuous, productive, dangerous, scary, disturbing decade from about 1960 to 1969, because the world was changing. and America was changing, and Hollywood was changing. And these were not superficial, easy changes. These were big, massive social changes happening along all kinds of levels: political, cultural, individual, social, technological, religious, all of it. Big, big eruptions, volcanic eruptions right throughout society. And why was this happening in 1960s? Why was it happening in America specifically? It's to put it simply, the generation before the young people of the 1960s came of age in the 1930s and the 40s. The 1930s were characterized by the Great Depression, so severe economic uh, fragility and pain and suffering because of the Great Depression. The 1940s was characterized by the Second World War. So that generation of people, young people, didn't get to go off and go to college and enjoy their youth. They first suffered economic deprivation, then they had to go fight in a global war, then they had to come back home to America and rebuild the country, and then also start the fight against communism in Europe. All right, so they were preoccupied with other stuff. Their children, however, the baby boomers, as they were called, because there's a huge boom in babies after the Second World War. Their children came of age in the late 50s and 60s, and they undertook a collective backlash against the generation of their parents, who were very conservative, normal, family orientated, patriotic, had just quote unquote normal values. You were religious, you started families, you followed authorities, you did everything that was expected of you, you followed orders, you were obedient. Okay. The generation of the 60s, however, the youth of the 60s were completely the opposite. Um, they were way more idealistic, way more progressive. They challenged all social norms, and a whole new kind of society, thanks to this, actually came into being. So youth-led backlash to conformity. And a lot of the other texts we're going to be studying in the semester are like that too, I would say, even if they're not set in the 60s, because the 60s kind of gave us, we still live with what happened in the 60s to this day. It gave us our understanding now of things like gender, race, sexuality, all this stuff was totally changed through this decade of the 60s. What did you have going on? You had like the civil rights movement, you had the war in Vietnam, you had the rise of the creation of the pill, which gave women sexual freedom and liberation for the first time ever in human history, right? You had the election of a young, youthful American president who was then assassinated in 1963. You had the Vietnam War, which this generation of young people refused to fight in and didn't want to, very critical of it. The first time ever in America, the young people refused to follow the orders of their government. You had, I'm going to talk about this now, you had lots and lots and lots of drugs being taken, different kinds of drugs, all sorts of drugs. Most infamously, perhaps this was the first time that people began to take psychedelics. I won't say too much about psychedelics other than if you take it, you kind of have a very trippy, weird internal experience. You know, the real world melts away and you journey deep inside your own psychology, your own psyche, and you are, I don't know for sure because I haven't done it myself, but this leads to kind of epiphanies and huge valuable insights that can change your whole life. This is one of the first people to encourage mass use of psychedelics, specifically LSD. This is Timothy Leary. And not only did he encourage people to take it, but he had a whole kind of life philosophy around doing so, based on his slogan, turn on, tune in, drop out. And he encouraged the youth of the 60s to do the following: to turn on, meaning go within to activate your neural and genetic equipment, become sensitive to the many and various levels of consciousness and the specific triggers in engaging them. Drop out suggested an active, selective, graceful process of detachment from involuntary or unconscious commitments. Drop out meant self-reliance, a discovery in one's singularity, a commitment to mobility, choice, and change. So like turn on, become aware, tune in to your own mind using drugs, travel inwards into yourself, have an experience, become enlightened, return again from this internal journey, and drop out of society, drop out of your family, drop out of your commitments. Don't go to college, don't go to school, don't obey your teachers, don't be just another brick in the wall. Fall out completely and rebuild society in a new way so that we can achieve peace. Essentially, this whole kind of movement was about peace. The idea is that if you took just a whole lot of drugs, weed, marijuana, LSD, ketamine, mescaline, all of these things, it made you realize the truth about the world, which is that it was trying to control you in order to kill other people, kind of thing. To serve your government, join the army, fight in Vietnam, and so on. Take the drugs instead and become a peaceful, enlightened person at ease with themselves. He was called by the president of the time, Richard Nixon, the most dangerous man in America for this. And certainly, look, I'm not going to encourage you to take drugs, but maybe he was somewhat right. Definitely very idealistic. However, there is a dark side to the story as well, because sometimes people take a little too many psychedelics or take it at rather too high a dose and end up having what you might call a bad trip. The people who took this kind of thing seriously, Timothy Leary, who really went full on in this, were given the term hippies. You were a hippie if you followed Timothy Leary. Kind of dropped out of regular society and forged some unknown new path nobody had taken before. You didn't work, you didn't go to school, you pieced out, you blissed out, and you followed your own internal desires. Okay, maybe that's not a bad way to live. Lots of fun, enjoyment, indulgence, hedonism, but it can come with a dark side too. Not everything is unmitigatedly good. One terrible consequence of the 60s was the rise of figures like this chap over here. This is Charles Manson. Look at those eyes. Doesn't he just look like a guy you want to bring home one day? Doesn't he just look absolutely charming and lovely? He was a cult leader. And he had this group of people around him called the Charles Manson family. They weren't literally his family. The cult was called the Charles Manson family, and otherwise known as the Charles Manson gang. They were a bunch of hippies, mostly women, mostly young women, interestingly enough. And they kind of lived in and you'll see this in the movie because he's in the movie. They kind of lived in a commune on an abandoned studio lot where they just said about being hippies, being at one with nature, taking drugs and living in a communal, peaceful life. Except things didn't stay peaceful. Cults never go well. There's one thing I know, one bit of advice I can give you straight away is don't join a cult. They never really go well. And Manson, for reasons we'll get into, and you can discover on your own as you watch the film, got his followers to carry out a series of murders in 1969. His dates were 34 to 2017. So he died quite recently, actually. He was an American criminal, cult leader, and musician who led the Manson family. They carried it out. some of the members of his cult committed a series of at least 9 murders at 4 locations in July and August 1969. And in 71, he was caught and convicted of first-degree murder, not because he actually murdered anyone himself, but because he brainwashed people to do it on his behalf and at his urging, including one very, very famous person whom his gang murdered, whose name was Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate, is a character in the movie. Okay, so she's one of the, I wouldn't say she's one of the main characters, but she's one of the kind of main-ish characters. But the movie concerns her murder by the Charles Manson gang, and for which he was ultimately responsible. That the murder happened in August 1969, and it officially ended the 60s in a very dark and gruesome way. So the 60s were, like I said, just to go back to this picture I showed you earlier, a time of just crazy extremes. On the one hand, you had this movement for peace, anti-war, take drugs, tune in, drop out, man, peace, love, free love, do what you like, follow your bliss. The music was great. You know, the Beatles came out of the 1960s, Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan, great music you can still listen to and which is in the movie. Great movies, great TV, great things happened. Like, and one way to think of it in an interesting way is how the direction of the 1960s was in these two opposite directions. On the one hand, they went deeply internal. You could take drugs that would allow you to travel all the way to the center of your very psyche, okay, and have a crazy non-material, abstract, spiritual experience, totally disconnected from the material world. On the other hand, in 1969, we went in the other direction, literally, because human beings landed on the moon in 1969. So we went to the furthest reaches of the human brain and to the furthest reaches that we could get to in a rocket ship and landed on the moon miraculously. So this time of crazy extremes, war, violence, huge social awakening around race, gender, sexuality, but also had this very dark, evil side to it. You know, so it was a time of huge idealism, subversion, romanticism, individuality, doing what you as an individual wanted. But underneath that was this gruesome violence everywhere, especially in the US. And I'm talking about America largely, not so much South Africa, but this stuff is filtered through as culture for us too. The 60s also saw a lot of political violence in the US. We saw the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, his brother. JFK was murdered in 63, his brother RFK in 68. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated also in 1968 too. So you had the three main political figures in the US of the 60s were all murdered, you know, sometimes on like live TV. And that almost happened the other day with dear old Trump. I mean, if you think that we live in tumultuous times now where things are uncertain and scary and dangerous, the 60s were like 100 times more uncertain. And yet all these forces going on in them, like I say, peace, war, love, hate, light, dark, enlightenment and madness, good and evil, all going on in this heady brew, this heady recipe of uncertainty, of creation. And so it's no surprise that a film director like Quentin Tarantino would be interested in making a movie about this, because it's a great time. It's a great mise en scène. There's lots of possible characters you can look at and stories and so on. And that is what he does. He's also, like I said, extremely interested in movies and movie making. You know, he doesn't just make movies, he makes movies about other movies and uses other movies to give him ideas for his own films. and he plays around with them. And like I was saying to my class the other day, when we watch a film, any film, like let's just take a Marvel movie or something, I kind of always wonder why it is that we watch those films. Not because they're bad, they aren't. They're actually very well made. They're funny and they're interesting, tell a good story. But you basically know when you sit down and watch your typical Hollywood movie, like a Marvel film, yeah, it takes you away from reality, which is what its purpose is. But you kind of know more or less what's going to happen, right? It isn't really that surprising at the end of the movie when the good guys win, because that's what you expect and it's what you want. A film is basically like it starts with the status quo, something disrupts the status quo. The good guy, the hero, the protagonist, the person we support or root for, identify with, who must be likable and must embody the good values of our society, sets the status quo back in place by defeating the villain, the opposite of the hero. And that's what we expect. It's what we like. We can watch that a million times over and over again throughout our entire life. But why? Why do we like that predictability? Are we genuinely surprised and shocked when we watch the same story over and over again? And I don't exactly know what's going on there, but Tarantino is a kind of director who uses all of those conventional elements of a film that are so deeply baked into us. We are so thoroughly conditioned to watch a film. We're kind of trained by films to watch other films. So every film we go into and watch, we've kind of already watched, and so our expectations are set. He knows this, Tarantino. So what he does in his films is quite clever in that he sets about subverting all of our expectations. He gives us the conventional stuff, the conventional setting, and before you know it, begins to do the opposite of what you expect. Or he does what you expect, but he does it in an extreme way. He doesn't just show characters punching each other. He shows characters being extremely gruesomely violent in a very, very gory way. Okay. And this movie of his, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, is no different. The 60s ended with the murder of Sharon Tate. And Tarantino is going to use this movie to tell that story, basically the murder of Sharon Tate. But not only that, because in fact, Sharon Tate's not even one of the main characters, and neither is Charles Manson. These two dudes here are. This is Rick Dalton, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, and Brad Pitt's character, whose name is Cliff Booth. And they are the main characters in the story. Both of them are kind of DiCaprio is kind of on his way out. He's a bit of a loser. He's been a TV star and a movie star for a long time, but his star is beginning to fade as he gets older. He's not getting the parts in films he wants to anymore. His sidekick slash personal assistant slash stunt double Cliff Booth, also a bit of a loser. This is very typical of Tarantino's movies. He likes to tell the story of people who live on the margins of society, people who are not necessarily the heroes of the world, but are kind of bit players who are small-time crooks, drug dealers, killers, bumbling fools, guys whose lives have kind of failed or been unable to launch, or their lives are in a bit of a mess or something like that. So it would be easy for him to make a movie about Sharon Tate, because that's the obvious place to start. But he actually tells the story of life around Sharon Tate, okay? All the people around her as they circulate through the film industry. They're all connected, and as the movie progresses, the characters become increasingly more connected through their activities in the film business as events draw suspensefully closer and closer and closer to a true historical moment we all know is going to come. And the movie is going to end, so we think, with the murder of Sharon Tate, which I won't go into it all right now, but if you want to, you should really just check this out on Wikipedia or something and read up about it, the murder of Sharon Tate, what happened, who did it, how it was carried out. It was very, very gruesome. It was just absolutely horrific stuff. So we know as the audience that that moment is coming. It's going to come towards the end of the film. But how are all of these characters related? How are they linked? What's exactly is going to happen? How is Tarantino going to bring it all together? And how is it all going to unfold? What is his ultimate point going to be in telling this specific story? A story that is a story about movies in the movie industry at the end of the 60s, about the murder of Sharon Tate, who herself was a rising star in Hollywood and in the movie system. I was trying to think, like, again, I'm not sure how much you know about her, but I was trying to think what would be the equivalent today? Who would be the equivalent today of Sharon Tate? And I kind of struggled to come up with an example because our culture is so fractured. She wouldn't have been as globally famous as Taylor Swift, but actually I think that she had maybe the same status in the industry and in the world that the actress who plays her in this film has as well, and that's Margot Robbie. Conventionally very attractive, a beautiful woman, extremely talented actress, can do serious films, can do funny movies, and Sharon Tate probably would have become what Margot Robbie is today to the movie making industry and to culture, broadly speaking. So she's kind of on that level. Would have been very famous, very well known, and her murder would have sent shockwaves through Hollywood, through the media, and indeed through the rest of the country as well. I'll get into it a little bit more in future classes, but go check it out because it was a very terrible, weird, extremely horrible event that happened. She was married to a guy who still is alive today, a film director. His name is Roman Polanski, who has had a very eventful life afterwards as well, to put it mildly. So this story has a long half-life, if I can put it that way. And those are the things we are going to be talking about and considering as we get into the film over the next few weeks. So by the next time I see you, which is about 2 weeks from today, please have watched the whole film. I think somebody said in the chat they don't have Netflix, so it's not a big rush to watch the film. Try get a hold of it somehow, some way. You've got about 2 weeks to do so, to have watched the whole thing. Break into somebody's Netflix account, beg, borrow, steal their password. Not sure if they still exist, but you'll definitely find a copy of this sitting on a shelf at a movie rental place. I don't know if those exist where you live. I've got one here in PE because PE is, like, in many ways still living in the year 2003, and so we still have video tavern and stuff. Anyway, and over the course of the next 3 weeks, what we're going to do is look at 3 different sequences of the film. The first 20 minutes, we're going to focus on that. Then there's a scene called the Spahn Ranch scene, or maybe in the American that's at the Spahn Ranch scene. And then we're going to consider the controversial ending. So those are the scenes I'm going to talk about over the next few weeks. In these we have one more live class in it, but in between that, in our off weeks, I'm going to make short videos concerning these scenes as well. I'll explain that now. Now, we're nearly finished. I'm going to run over a little bit here, but I just want to show you what I'm talking about. And basically, in each scene, we're going to consider how the various filmic elements are used and how oh dear, I've just left words out there. Basically, how we can analyze the intention of the filmmaker in these specific scenes by using key filmic elements. So as you watch the film, please also reuse a document that is called Key Film Techniques. It's available on Learning Unit 1 and VC Learn, and I've also put it under more resources. Okay, so you can find it there too. Speaking of, I'm going to end the class in just a couple of minutes, but I wanted to quickly share my screen with you to show you where I've placed these things and what they look like. Okay, share screen. I've got to press this button. I think that button. Or this one. Let me try this one. Okay, so you should be seeing my screen now. This is your this is your more resources section. So if you're confused, you can't remember, you haven't used this in a while, you go into the left-hand part of VC Learn here on the screen, and you just go find more resources, click on that, and it'll take you to this. This is where I put the collab link for all the classes. We're just going to reuse the same link for every class that we have. This will be a link to the YouTube page where I upload all of my recordings. I've got a pacer here, paces per learning unit, which I'm going to show you now. And then useful docs and resources. This is where I've put a whole bunch of stuff for you to use for your own benefit. So there's a key film techniques document I was just talking about. It explains things around cinematography, camera angles, lighting, and so on. It's a way to help you see how a film is technically put together. Then I've just got some other things like how to write an essay, things about literature that are useful, and then an essay checklist that is a PDF which just gives you some tips on how to write a solid essay. So in your own time, go and check those things out, please. And then let me just go here. This is stuff that I put in your announcements, so it should have come up in the last few days. This is what your first pacer looks like. This is just for Learning Unit 1. So today I've done a live class, intro to the module. Next week, Wednesday, by July 31st, I will have posted a shorter recording, a video, which you can watch. And it will be my own analysis of the first 20 minutes of the film using the LOs 1 to 3, okay? I will also come up with an ICE task for you, which I'll communicate then. Which will need to be completed by August 21. That's TBD. I haven't quite decided what I'm gonna do for that just yet. And then August 7th, we'll have another live class during which I'll do an analysis of the Spahn Ranch scene from the film. And then in the next off week where we don't see each other, I'll post another short video discussing the film's ending. So that for each learning unit, you guys will have something like 4 contacts with me, okay? 2 live recordings and 2 recorded videos. This might come, these July and August 1, July 31, August 14 ones might just be 2 short videos, what might be 1 longish one, but I'll try to keep it to like in total 15 or 20 minutes. Okay. So look out for that next week. That's what I'll post next week, and it will all be chucked up on my YouTube. Don't know if there's anything else I wanted to share with you. There's news about entering a creative writing competition. If you want to, just open that PDF, check it out, send in any work if that's your thing. But otherwise, I think that was it. I just wanted to give you a nice intro to the class. Hopefully that kind of gave you an idea of what we're going to be up to. And also my approach, you know, it's English literature. It's very broad, it's expansive. You can do a lot of different things with it. My expectations from you guys when you write your assignments, your essays, your exam, is that you show your own unique, original understanding of the work as best you can. What I'm interested in is making sure that you have said something that is your own. It's your interpretation of the work. That's what English is all about. The best advice I can give you, if you're not able to attend classes or watch all the recordings and so on, the best thing you can do for yourself is just to watch and read all the texts. If you just do that, you will have a huge head start on the work. If you're just familiar in your own mind with what happens in the stories, what happened in the movie, you have some kind of your own original personal reaction to that work in your head, then you are doing well. Then you are analyzing and thinking about literature, and that's the best approach you can have. So read the stuff, watch the stuff. It will serve you very, very well because it will give you lots of things to say in your assignments, in your essays, and in your exam. Okay, so that's the best advice I can give you All right, so I'm going to leave it there. I don't know if you guys have any questions for me. You can fire away and ask. I don't mind if you just use the chat, or if you want to unmute and come forward and talk. Just going through some of the comments you had here, I don't see any questions or worries, just somebody who said they don't have an account with Netflix, but there'll be some way you can get a hold of it. Okay, I'm going to briefly come back on video. Hopefully I look decent. I think I look okay. That's me. So it was nice to do the first class. Again, look out next week, 31st of July, for a short video or two, and then we'll regather on August 7th for our second live class. Okay, let me send the video away. Any other questions? I'll hang around here online for about 5 minutes. I'll just be sitting here. If you want to ask a question, you've got the 5-minute period to do so. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening, enjoy the rest of your week, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Okay, cheers everybody.